Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some. My name is Amy Marin, and I'm supporting the facilitation of the 2021 online edition of Forest Legality Week. I'd like to start by giving some basic instructions to all participants to facilitate your participation in today's meeting. This event will have live interpretation in English, Spanish, and French over the next few days. This first session will be all in English. However, other sessions will have French and Spanish speakers. So we will now give some brief instructions in Spanish and French to those who have joined us and require interpretation. Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Amy Maron y estoy apoyando esta edición de la Semana de la Legalidad Forestal 2021. Y como primera instrucción me gustaría indicarles cómo acceder a la interpretación en caso de que vaya a acompañarnos en español. Emily, can you put the next slide for me? Ok. Aquí van a ver que la barra de navegación de Zoom tiene un globo donde dice interpretación. Tiene que hacer clic ahí y seleccione el canal del español. Now Marie will give us some indications to the French speakers.
Bonjour, bienvenue à l'édition virtuelle de la Semaine de la légalité forestière. Cet événement sera interprété simultanément en français. Pour accéder à l'interprétation, vous pouvez cliquer sur le bouton en forme de globe, interprétation, dans la barre de navigation Zoom. Vous pourrez ensuite sélectionner la chaîne française. Et si vous rencontrez des difficultés avec l'interprétation simultanée pendant la réunion, veuillez nous contacter par chat.
This is the announcement for French speakers. If there are any issues with interpretation, do not hesitate to write in the chat.
Now, I'm going to go to the next slide and see just a few additional indications. So due to the number of participants, you will have the opportunity to pose questions and let us know of any technical difficulties via the chat, the Zoom chat. So if you want to take a moment now, I see that Scott introduced himself and there's some other people saying hello. If you can take a moment to find the chat, send a quick hello stating your name, organization, and maybe where you're connecting from. And if by chance someone shared their link with you to this meeting, if you can look for your box where you can see your video or the name of where you're connected, if you can select these, there are 3 dots. If you happen to be under someone else's name, you can rename yourself and make sure that you're under your own name. And just to let you know that we are recording this event because we know there are people in other time zones that couldn't connect. And now I'm going to do a quick survey to see a little bit more about who's here, who's connecting, and also give you an opportunity to let you know who else is connected. So we're going to share in the chat a link to the survey that I'm showing. So if you click on the link that we're about to paste in this chat, you should be able to navigate directly to a quick survey that we're showing right now. And if you'd like to navigate to the survey from another device, like if you have your phone nearby, you can also use the code that's at the top by going to menti.com and putting in this code that's up here, 60700672. Great, we have some answers coming in. Wonderful, just give a bit more time. The quickest way to access it is via the link that Catherine Pierron put in the chat. She just put it there again for those who didn't see it as other messages were coming in. Wonderful. Some bunch of responses still coming in. Just give one more minute, but we've got NGO, government agencies, private sector, other, academia. Okay. All right, hopefully we'll put that link in there again so you can quickly access it for those people who are coming in the meeting room still. And I'm going to put another question up for you. And if you stay in there, you should see it come up automatically. So interested to see where you're joining from to get a sense. Lots of people from North America, Asia, Central America, and the Caribbean. So far, a large contingent from North America. Let's give a few more seconds. See if we get some more answers in there. I see some got a nice contingent from Europe. I just had it covered with all your lovely videos. So sorry about that. And wonderful. Okay. Great. Okay, so now, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Charles Chip Barber, who is Director of the Forest Legality Initiative at the World Resources Institute, WRI, a global policy-focused nonprofit focusing on environment and sustainable development. Prior to joining WRI, Dr. Barber served from 2009 to 2014 as Forest Division Chief at the U.S. Department of State, and from 2005 to 2009 as environmental advisor at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Prior to his government service, he worked as an environmental consultant for numerous multilateral agencies and was also previously with WRI from 1989 to 2001.
Thanks very much, Amy, and good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you, dear colleagues and friends. So as Amy said, I'm Chip Barber, and I direct the Forest Legality Initiative here at WRI. And on behalf of WRI, I'd like to welcome you to this virtual Forest Legality Week 2021. I'd also at the outset like to extend our thanks to the U.S. Forest Service, our longtime partner, for their generous support to our whole forest program, including Forest Legality Week. Some of that support comes through the Forest Service from USAID and the State Department, so we'd also like to extend our thanks to those longtime friends and partners. We last held Forest Legality Week in October 2019 at our global headquarters here in Washington, D.C., where I am speaking to you from. And it was a lively and a productive affair, in person, of course. Given that 2020 was shaping up to be, as people were calling it, a super year of meetings on environmental issues, a lot of big international meetings, we thought it might be a good idea to give Forest Legality Week a bit of a rest until the first part of 2021. That turned out to be a good idea, but for the terrible reason you all are aware of. The past 16 months haven't been easy, as you all know. And while in some parts of the world, including here around Washington, the shadow of the pandemic seems to be gradually lifting, we're well aware as a global organization that most of the world is still in the thick of it and continues to suffer. Many of you have experienced illness, lost loved ones and colleagues, as have we. Many others have endured economic setbacks. And really none of us are going to be free of this pandemic until we are all free of it. So it's got to be a global effort. And the task of building back much better, we hope, will be the task of years, not just weeks or months. So we're starting today with two panels focused on the impact of COVID on the private sector. The first is going to cover overall impacts, while the second one will focus on small and medium enterprises. And there you have the agenda for today. Tomorrow, we're going to delve into recent developments on policies related to supply chains for agricultural commodities and how they may affect the trade in timber and forest products. On Thursday, we're going to have one panel to hear about recent developments in Vietnam, and a second that provides an update on remote sensing and different kinds of deforestation alerts and experiences that have experiences in applying those on the ground in many different countries. Finally, we started this week yesterday with two side meetings, one hosted by the Forest Service and one by Forest Trends. In case you weren't able to attend those, I hope you are able to listen to those because they've been recorded and read all of the reports that those events were highlighting. Similarly, on Friday, we have two side meetings hosted by other organizations. The links for registering for these side meetings can be found on the agenda page, which I believe is going to be put into the chat, but we can certainly get to you. And with that, I would like to turn it over for some introductory remarks by Alicia Grimes, an old friend and colleague who's a natural resources officer and senior forestry advisor in USAID's Center for Energy, Environment, and Innovation in the Division for Natural Climate Solutions. Hi, Alicia. She's worked on the issue of illegal logging and associated trade at USAID since 2003, really since it was a thing. And in that capacity, she's managed several global public-private partnerships, including with WRI and EIA, the Forest Legality Alliance, which was the predecessor for our program that exists now. She's worked with a lot of other US government agencies to support work on illegal logging, including serving on a number of US delegations to the ITTO and APEC and other bodies. And Alicia recently transferred to this natural climate solutions team at USAID, where she continues to work on forest governance, stakeholder engagement, and global supply chains as necessary factors for achieving our climate change goals. And with that, Alicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chip. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forest Legality Week 2021. It's really great to see you all here. A lot of you, 128, more than that, and a diverse group, and happy to see some private sector participation, as well as the rest of all of us working on forests. We're very pleased to be supporting this event again this year through our partnership with the U.S. Forest Service International Programs. They've been longstanding partners of USAID's for decades, and happy to be working with them on this. It's really hard to believe that it's been 12 years since the original Forest Legality Alliance came together, right about the time of the U.S. Lacey Act Amendment. And we've been supporting these dialogues to bring about a diverse group of stakeholders to be able to work on illegal logging and associated trade. While many of us would rather be in person, we decided it was important to carry on virtually regardless, giving the continuing importance of forests to our economies, enterprises, and Earth's climate and biodiversity, but also because of the unfortunate turn of events that you may have heard about in other meetings, including the impact of COVID-19 on the forest sector, on forests, on forest people. Several of you in the audience in the room have documented the serious impact of the pandemic on forest industry, trade, local livelihoods, and the forest resources, particularly in the tropics. The economic restrictions, recession, travel restrictions, working from home, has reduced the presence of enterprises and law enforcement in forests, making them vulnerable to encroachment, illegal logging, clearing, The Chatham House recently held a donor roundtable with Forest People's Program on the impact on the fact that there were environmental rollbacks occurring and impacting Indigenous people, very important keepers of our forests, as you know. And so we look more to hearing and tracking the impacts of the pandemic and timber trade at this morning's session. On the positive side, given their role in supporting livelihoods in the rural poor and national economies and in mitigating climate, forests provide an opportunity to play a role in economic recovery as countries emerge from the pandemic. And USAID is helping a lot with this, both on the health side and on the economic growth side, but also continuing our support for conservation of forests and sustainable management of lands and forests. We need to take this opportunity not to let up on halting illegal deforestation and illegal logging, and get forests back on track to removing greenhouse gases through the protection, restoration, and sustainable management and legal and transparent trade. We in this group here, we've been looking at the demand side and trade equation for a while now, implementing a variety of measures, voluntary or required, on trade, particularly after the passage of the US Lacey Act. Now, instead of solely looking at the impacts of illegal logging, harvesting, and trade, we are looking at the role of agriculture, commercial agriculture, commodities, and deforestation, including illegal deforestation. Now, many of you hopefully participated in Forest Trend's side event yesterday and have seen their new report on illicit harvest, complicit goods, which updates their statistics on deforestation due to commercial agriculture, and also to what extent, using conservative methodology, this may be illegal. And I was certainly shocked to find that deforestation had increased 52% during the period of 2013 to 2019, or 11 million hectares per year. Of that amount, 60% was driven by commercial agriculture, 69% of which was illegal. That's astounding, and the majority of this illegal deforestation was concentrated in 3 countries: Brazil, Indonesia, and the DRC. Astounding numbers, increases there. So I hope you had an opportunity to attend this side event. We've also other members of this group, World Wildlife Fund, WRI, and others have certainly also added, and EIA have also done a lot of recent analysis, adding to the stark, unfortunate numbers that we keep facing all the time. So tomorrow we're going to have some interesting discussions on the issue of supply chains and their impact on forests, including agricultural commodities. We also hear more about the US forest products trading partners, Vietnam, and how enterprises and the governments are striving to meet legality requirements. USAID has had a substantial biodiversity and forest program in Vietnam, building capacity to protect and manage forests and other ecosystems. And we look forward to having that discussion tomorrow. We've learned a lot in the past decade, including how challenging it is to implement or comply with timber regulations in such a global and diverse industry, and ways that we can possibly strike a balance to avoid unintended consequences of burdening businesses and shifting flows to less sensitive markets and inadvertently causing more loss of forests. The need to scale up technology and the need to work together, finding solutions that that require, it's going to require a lot of creativity and a lot of diverse stakeholders like we have here. Recently, Apex Expert Group on Illegal Logging had a great workshop chaired by Emma Hatcher of Australia and monitored by Cindy Squires of IWPA to examine some of the challenges in meeting legality requirements. And big thing that came out on that is, as I recall, is the issue of data management, data access, data reliability, and also translation of information and regulations into local languages so that actually local enterprises can have access to the information as well. Seems obvious, but a new thing. So I think we have a lot of great things to discuss this week. And again, now that, USAID, Washington,
Nous avons beaucoup de choses à discuter.
and we are also working on a agency climate change strategy. Some of you may have been consulted. We're doing a lot of outreach to different groups right now. But we certainly want to make sure that we have a sound strategy and approach on forests, which is an enormous part of mitigating climate change. So with that, I wish you a good rest of the Forest Legality Week, and I'll see you in the meetings. Back to you, Chip.
Thanks so much, Alicia, for giving us that great tour of what's been going on and what's happening with the issues. It's my final job today is to introduce Guillermo Navarro, who is going to be our chair and moderator for the next session. Guillermo is the coordinator of the UN FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization's Forest Law Enforcement, the FLEGT program, Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade program in Latin America. Previously, he was the director of the Latin American Chair on Forest Policy and Economics at the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center, or CATIE. So I'm handing it over to you, Guillermo. Thanks so much for doing this for us.
Thank you, Chip, for the kind introduction. And good morning, everyone in America, good afternoon in Europe, and good evening in Asia. Welcome to all participants to this session on the pandemic and the timber forest products trade. As you are aware, COVID-19 has had a severe impact on timber forest product sector. First of all, we now have a demand for timber products in global markets that have risen, and as people work from home and invested in remodeling their homes and doing home repairs and do-it-yourself projects. Moreover, we have the situation of low interest rates, increasing housing demand as people move away from cities. And they invested in new homes, and as you have been, home building increased in the second half of 2020. Both conditions have put pressure on forest operation, which take time for getting forest permits, and also considering that some mills capacity is very limited in the short run. Adding to this condition, the forest industry is also facing input, logistics, and worker shortages. So this is a condition that we would like to discuss in this session. And the particular objective of this session is to look at some of the impacts of the pandemic on the timber sector, and to discuss potential implications for the near future and the long run future. This session, we will explore how this pandemic has shifted global trade of timber products. What are some of the economic and environmental implications for the future? What has the global lockdown impacted logistic production factors and flow of timber products? And what all these mean for the consumer and producers? Also, how have travel restriction impacted audits and due diligence processes? How the pandemic impacted legal enforcement and compliance? And how have authorities, companies, and regulators responded to all this situation? This session will feature 4 experts that will help us given some elements from to build a comprehensive view of the situation. We'll try to organize the session in this way. After this introduction, I will introduce the speakers who will present for 10 minutes each. After that, we will have a Q&A session and a panel discussion. And after that, I will close with a summary of the main messages for the session. So let's start. The first speaker that we have is Rupert Oliver. Rupert is the director of Forest Industries Intelligence, and he's also the manager of the Sustainable Timber Information Exchange, a joint initiative between ITTO and the Global Timber Forum to provide free and easy access to timber trade data and facilitate near real-time monitoring of global timber trade trends. Rupert, the mic is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm actually really commenting today on behalf of the FLEGT Independent Market Monitor, for which I'm a trade analyst. I'm going to comment quite specifically, because I've only got about 10 minutes, so I will comment very specifically on certain specific issues, looking particularly at the current situation with regard to Indonesian trade flows into the EU, and also to look at the broader global context of the FLEGT policy process, because I can well understand, obviously, this movement towards looking at agricultural commodities. It's important, and I can understand the rationale for it. But at the same time, we mustn't lose sight of the advantages of the FLEGT process, of the advantages of a very clear focus on forest products, which are effectively forest-friendly commodities. Unlike a lot of forest risk commodities, forest products can be forest-friendly products. And at the same time, the advantages of the FLEGT process in terms of scale and engagement, things which are very important to retain in future policy processes moving forward. So just to look at to comment on the scale of the FLEGT process, if we look at the global forest products trade in the last 4 years, we can see here in these charts on the left-hand side, we can see how the tropical products trade has evolved over the last 4 years. One thing you will notice immediately is actually the level of exports in 2020, despite COVID, was slightly higher than in 2019 in terms of value. That's partly due to an increase in unit values of products. There's been a lot of price escalation last year, partly due to the supply problems with COVID. At the same time, there was a very large increase in exports from Vietnam, particularly to the United States. This, of course, was driven partly by a rapid increase in demand for furniture and other home improvement products during the pandemic last year in the United States, during this period of low interest rates, large government stimuluses to boost the economy, particularly in the United States, but also in the EU and parts of Asia. And at the same time, there was the trade dispute, of course, between China and the United States, which led to a large amount of product exports being diverted through Vietnam, and the reinvestment of new processing capacity in Vietnam, and also to some extent in Indonesia. So the overall effect was to have actually an increase in value of exports from tropical countries last year. But at the same time, this has actually had quite a big bearing on the scope of coverage of the FLEGT voluntary partnership agreements. Just looking together, just the two countries together, Indonesia and Vietnam, in terms of total exports from tropical countries, those two countries account for nearly 50% of all export value. So just the fact that those two countries are engaged, very actively engaged in the VPA process, shows the level of the scope, the broad scope of the FLEGT VPA process. Of course, several African countries are also engaged. Cameroon, the largest exporter of wood products from the tropical region of Africa, is engaged. The process there, of course, of the VPA process is happening rather slower, but the fact that they are engaged and committed to eventually implementing some sort of TLAS is very significant. If we look on the importing side, on the consumer side, again, the scope of the FLEGT process, the scope of the legality due diligence laws which already exist are considerable. These slides actually show the coverage of due diligence requirements in import trade in the total wood products trade. By wood products, I'm referring both to all those products in Chapter 44 of the harmonized system, plus the wood furniture products in Chapter 94. And if you look at total value of trade in those products globally, over 60% of imports are into countries that now have some form of due diligence requirement. So again, the wood products trade is very, very much engaged in a process of moving towards legality, verification, implementation of due diligence requirements, something which is not reflected in any other commodity sector as far as I'm aware. The level of engagement and commitment to due diligence requirements in the wood product sector is unsurpassed in any commodity sector at this stage. And the fact that we've got 60% of imports already covered by due diligence requirements is something significant that needs to be built on. And incidentally, that 60% figure does not include China, which already has a law in place. Of course, the Article 65 of its forest law, which was introduced in 2019, although that's not included in this chart for the simple reason that there's no regulations being implemented for that particular law yet. But if we did include China as a country with due diligence, that would take the total level of imports that are covered by some sort of due diligence requirements to almost 80% of the wood and wood furniture trade worldwide. Now, just briefly, I'm going to talk about the changes in the EU and UK tropical timber imports during the period of time that I would say was particularly influenced by the FLEGT process. These slides here show the largest winners and largest losers in EU plus UK tropical timber imports, comparing the periods 2014 to 2016, which was the period of early implementation of EUTR, with the period 2017 to 2019, which was the period of late implementation of EUTR, and also coincides with the period when FLEGT licenses were issued, which started in November 2016. This actually highlights, this chart I think highlights some of the real challenges in implementing due diligence requirements and in trying to shift the whole trade towards licensed products. There are still a lot of challenges with that. But again, some progress has been made, and it's certainly there is an indication here that this is something that can be built on and can have some very positive effects, although there are still a lot of gaps in implementation that need to be addressed. If we look at the largest winners, of course, it's encouraging that FLEGT licensed products do appear on the side of the winners. Indonesian plywood, Indonesian joinery, and Indonesian furniture have all seen a slight increase in imports into the EU market and the UK market during this period of licensing, but they have not seen the same sort of gains that have been seen by countries which are not engaged in any sort of VPA process and which are often regarded as relatively high risk from an illegal logging perspective. Furniture from India, very large increases into the EU market during that period 2017 to 2019, and a lot of increase of Chinese plywood, much of that destined for the UK market particularly. Again, given that there might be significant risks of illegality with some of those products, it's a concern that they are continuing to arrive into the EU market in such large volumes. On the losing side, yes, some of the biggest losers, Malaysian sawn timber. That's primarily because Malaysia has been moving up the value chain and is now exporting more furniture products. And in fact, furniture from Malaysia has been one of the biggest gainers in the EU market. But other big losers there, Indonesia does appear on the side of the big losers on certain product groups, Indonesian flooring, Indonesian sawn products, that other not elsewhere stated are all on the side of the losers, which just goes to show that you can't shift the market simply with licensing, simply with forms of verification. There are a lot of other issues that are contributing to driving the market changes. This looks at the more recent trends. During the time of COVID, it compares the annual value of EU imports in 2020 with the annual value in 2019. And of course, the losers, the scales here are a little bit misleading here because the losers are considerably bigger than the winners during last year, not surprisingly. And from a perspective of FLEGT licensing, it is a big concern that a lot of the big losers last year in the EU market were Indonesian products, having made a lot of gains in the previous year. They then lost a lot of those gains last year. And in fact, a lot of the losses last year in imports into the EU were driven by significant logistical problems, the problems of getting containers out of Southeast Asia, which have particularly hit exports from Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia. Whereas on the other hand, the major gainers, the largest winners has been Singapore, primarily because that was the one place where containers, there was a supply of containers for shipment into the EU and UK markets. Incidentally, the other big winner last year was Ecuador sawnwood, a lot of that balsa wood destined for manufacture of windmills for the energy sector. So very specific policy initiatives on the EU side are benefiting certain product imports into the EU, particularly, for example, the creation of wind farms and the development of demand for that. But the largest losers were very much related to logistical problems, and this is creating it is a concern that a lot of the gains that were made by Indonesian products in the EU market last year have subsequently been wiped out. So we hope that that is only a temporary trend and that longer term Indonesian FLEGT licensed products will gain greater market share in the EU in the EU market. There are good signs in some the surveys that have been undertaken by the FLEGT Independent Market Monitor, assessing attitudes to FLEGT licensed timber in the EU market have actually been very positive in many ways. The latest survey in 2020 covered over 100 EU TR and UK timber regulation operators and traders in 6 European countries, in Belgium, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Germany, and the UK. And it very clearly showed that traders and operators in the EU their awareness of the benefits of FLEGT licensing is rising quite significantly, although there is still a bit of ambiguity and uncertainty over the links between licensing and sustainability, and a bit of uncertainty as to whether, for example, licensing needs to be more widely recognized in procurement policies as providing assurances of sustainability. Just to make a few concluding comments, as I mentioned and emphasized at the start, it's very important that FLEGT, TLAS and trade due diligence measures, recognizing that they have a significant and rising global coverage, and this is something that needs to be built on in the development of global policy with respect to forest conservation. Secondly, to emphasize that the Indonesian SVLK achievement, it is quite extraordinary what was achieved in Indonesia. There's been a lot of talk about it taking too long and that the whole process of FLEGT is rather complicated. But at the same time, it's very important to recognize that in an extremely complicated country that was involved in a whole process of governance reform, it does take time. And yet Indonesia has managed to implement a system for demonstrating the legality of all wood products exports in a relatively short period of time. And that, again, is an achievement that needs to be acknowledged and widely promoted as an exemplary achievement. As for the activities in the EU and UK, I think there's a very strong need for a continued focus on delivering genuine market advantages to FLEGT licensed products, to ensure consistent enforcement of the laws that already exist, the EU TR and the UK timber regulation. That needs to be implemented and enforced effectively. There's a clear need for a continuing for promoting the link between FLEGT, good forest governance, and sustainability. There's still a lot of uncertainty about what the links are. And of course, sustainability certification requirements, they can only be established in countries where there is existing good forest governance. It is necessary prerequisite to demonstration of sustainability. There's need for wider recognition of FLEGT licensed timber in procurement policy and green building. And it's important to continue to promote the leading role of the wood product sector in support of innovative regulation and a low carbon future. And just a couple of minor comments at the end. I think it's very important that we do emphasize the need to focus on incentives, the positive sides of these policy initiatives. Nikita Khrushchev, not a well-known philosopher, but I think what he says here is quite right. Call it what you will, incentives are what get people to work harder. And when there is desperation, which I think there's a lot of people that are living in desperation at the present time, the important thing is to offer hope. Thank you for that. And just to say that there will be more information on global trade trends, tropical trade trends offered at an IMM webinar that will be taking place on Thursday. The details are on the FLEGT IMM website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rupert. Very nice presentation, and gave us a lot of food for thought. Our second speaker is Joe O'Donnell. Joe is the Director of Government and Public Affairs for the International Wood Product Association. Before joining the IWPA, he served 10 years on the staff of the former US Senator Richard Lugar, a former chairman of both the US Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry and the Committee on Forest Relations. Joe, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Guillermo. I very much appreciate this opportunity to walk attendees through the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the US market for globally sourced wood products, as well as importer considerations with respect to due diligence in the era of global travel restrictions due to the pandemic. While the global toll on human lives and negative impacts on individual businesses has been huge, I'm sure many of you know that the US economy has bounced back strongly from the initial COVID shock felt in early and mid 2020. After being down sharply in the first half of 2020, we have seen historic economic growth numbers both in Q3 and Q4 2020, and the economy is continuing to grow at a 6.4% rate for the first quarter of 2021, as you see in that first graph. Importantly, as Guillermo and Rupert both mentioned, a lot of this growth has been driven by sectors that use wood products intensively, like home building. You see that home building after plummeting initially during the COVID shock has really bounced back strongly. And as we all know, having spent a lot of time in our homes over the last 16 months, there has been a distinct incentive, as well as spurred by the low interest rates, to make some improvements at home, and a lot of that uses wood intensively. While demand is strong in North America, there have been distinct challenges. The labor supply is tight, and global supply chains are in many cases in chaos. Thankfully, the next presenter, Dan Wackerman, will go into that nightmare in much greater detail than I ever could, because he lives through it every day. I want to go through the next several slides quickly. I'm going to share a lot of info that was compiled for IWPA by Andy Johnson from the Hardwood Market Report. HMR is a tremendous resource for the wood products industry, and I believe that WRI will make these slides available, but feel free to reach out to me directly if any of this information is important to you, and I'm happy to provide them. Here on the first slide, you see US imports of tropical hardwood lumber. Obviously, for several years, that's been trending downward. And this trend you see was exacerbated by COVID. There are many factors that play into this, but a lot of it has to do with a preference for lighter or painted wood products and a movement towards composite or engineered wood look products. Here we see that trend broken down by species. There on the left, you see that Ipe, largely used in high-end decking applications, is the major species that has bucked that downward trend. This slide gives you a sense of hardwood lumber consumption by product. You'll note that this is consumption of both domestic and imported lumber. And this gives you a sense that the downward trend over recent years isn't only imported products, it's use of domestic hardwood lumber as well. Here we're looking at US imports of hardwood plywood. You see a distinct shift away from China as a result of the US-China trade war initiated by the Trump administration, as well as the anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders on hardwood plywood manufactured in China. You'll note that much of the new production has moved recently to Vietnam, which I believe will be a topic, as mentioned, will be a topic of discussion later during Forest Legality Week. In the next 3 slides, you'll see US imports of manufactured wooden products, and which are continuing to trend upward even through the pandemic. Here we see a steady upward trend for US imports of wood furniture, with China's share shrinking while that of other countries, especially Vietnam, grow. Here we have US imports of wooden kitchen cabinets and countertops. As you see, there has also been a distinct move away from China due to recent trade remedy action. And other producers have ramped up production to fill the void. As you can see, some of those cohorts rising rapidly, especially beginning in 2019. And finally, we have solid hardwood flooring, where you can see that the source countries have diversified in recent years. After that brief market overview, I'm going to pivot to a look at how many US importers have had to adjust their due diligence procedures due to COVID travel restrictions. Previously, importers relied heavily on periodic in-person site visits and audits. Unfortunately, when travel was shut down, unless you had staff in country, you were severely limited in what you could do. And there's no question that in-person visits allow you to learn more in a very short time. One member put it that the white rabbit is the thread you normally only find on site, and it's something that maybe you see something that is interesting or out of place, and it allows you to pull on that thread and resolve whether it's just a quirk of that production or something that raises concern, and how do you deal with that when you can't be on site. And also walking the factory floor during audits provides mountains of information about your supplier. I know I've heard many members talk about the fact that just seeing the cleanliness of a facility or how they sort their wood products allows the importer to educate themselves and ask questions that can lead to positive outcomes as far as due diligence is concerned. And without being on site, you can't do that. So what can you do? Obviously, importers were forced to, by necessity, to transition to remote audits. Many, as we all know, many use technology like Zoom or Microsoft Teams to conduct remote audits and relied heavily on intensive document review. That has positives and negatives. Some of the positives are you can sample represented documents, and you can do it with virtually no notice. Some companies have the benefit of customer quality control staff in country, and so you can virtually train that staff to meet new roles. And additionally, follow-up virtual inspections can be executed randomly and more frequently. So those are some of the positives, but I think we all know that technology will never replace boots on the ground. And so remote auditing is a temporary solution, and hopefully travel will open up again soon. Some of the main challenges are obviously your eyes on your supplier are your first line of defense. And it's harder to challenge items you may question from thousands of miles away. It takes time. I know, being a US-based trade association, we often struggle to set up meetings on a time frame that works for members spread across the US. Well, what if your suppliers are literally on the other side of the globe, and you have morning or night issues? That really slows down kind of the pace and the cadence of communication. Also, there are language and cultural barriers that you can work through in person, but they're exacerbated when you're connecting virtually and having to deal with each other across a computer screen. And there's just no question that you don't see the full picture through a computer video camera. Again, we talked about walking the factory floor and being able to maybe direct a prospective supplier down a side of their factory that maybe they weren't intending to show you, and insisting upon things like that. Well, that's harder to do when all you're doing is looking at each other through a computer camera. And so with that, I know that at least the US importers and IWPA's membership know that COVID-19 is not an excuse. So what do you do? Well, I think there's a philosophy among many importers that doing something is always better than doing nothing. And that just because of the COVID restrictions, due care and reasonable and prudent precautions did not pause. And so, again, our hope is that at least in the US, things have started to open back up, but I know that many areas of the globe are continuing under lockdowns, and it doesn't look like travel restrictions are going away anytime soon. So I think, as Alicia mentioned and put very well, flexibility and innovative thinking and use of technology are key principles that folks are going to have to use intensively going forward. So with that, I'll leave it there, and I look forward to the discussion at the end of the presentations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe. Very interesting. I totally agree with your presentation, and this not only applies to due diligence, but also to conferences like this one. So we would like to have in the future boots on the conference too. So with that, we are delighted to have, I will present you to our third speaker, Dan Wackerman. Dan has been president and CEO of John A. Steer Company since 2008, where he has overseen dramatic growth and expansion of services at Steer, particularly in global and domestic transportation and logistics. For many years, Dan has served as a board member and advisor for several international trade organizations, including the IWPA. Dan, the mic is yours. You have 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Guillermo, and hello, everyone, and thanks for inviting me. And can you hear me? Okay, great.
Very well, very well.
So I'm Dan Wackerman. I'm president of John Steer Company. We're a 120-year-old customs broker and international logistics company based in Philadelphia. And we heavily serve specialized trades, agricultural commodities, food and beverage. And we've always had a niche in both clearing and handling regulatory services for importers for forest products, including plywood, lumber, paper, pulp. And then we've, over the last several decades, become more involved in the logistics aspect of the business, in brokering as a non-asset-based service provider, transportation of all types. So mainly ocean shipping, but also domestic trucking, consolidation, rail truck intermodal services, and that kind of thing. So we have a lot of experience, and my perspective today is just to give you a boots on the ground information about the challenges in the US market, which in terms of supply chain, which are really representative of, I'm sure, what's going on in a lot of the rest of the world. And I can tell you that over the last 12 months, it's been more challenging than in the previous 20 years combined in terms of supply chain disruptions. There's one general theme that I would start with it's that, every single supply chain that we see globally, we handle everything from, wine, foodstuffs, forest products, dairy products. Every single supply chain is in a severe challenge right now. And so the other point I'd like to start with is, that these shifts are so dramatic right now that they are turning into paradigm shifts. They're not a one-time COVID-related problem or issue. Typically, a small impact on the supply chain, let's say, that might impact one port for 1 week, would take 8 to 12 weeks to resolve itself. And right now, there are so many global impacts that it's really, we're looking out years for some of these acute issues to be resolved. But we could go right to that next slide, Amy, and get right into the meat and potatoes here with COVID impacts. So I'm not going to really discuss the sort of the legality, the regulatory issues so much, but just know that we're heavily involved in that as a service provider, mainly for U.S. importers and exporters, to help those folks make sure that that their due diligence is translated properly when we make government declarations on their behalf, whether that be export declarations or customs import entries. We do a lot of Lacey Act declarations on behalf of importers. So we're heavily involved in that aspect of the trade, but our focus is really on the transactional piece. So my comments will really be on sort of the day-to-day impacts that we see in the marketplace. So first and foremost, there's a huge volume increase in the US market for imports. Just give you a few statistics. Export volumes from China to the US increased almost 20%, comparing March year on year. The Yantian port in China had the highest increase among major Chinese ports, almost 36%. I'll come back to Yantian because there's another acute issue there, a second COVID outbreak and a sort of massive congestion problem in Yantian, which if there's anything that you take away from my presentation, it's that all of our supply chains are totally interdependent. So when something goes wrong in Yantian, it affects Oakland, it affects Le Havre, it affects global ports. because all of these all the shipping links, they're all linked together, both in terms of equipment, the carrier flow, the port of call, timing, all of those kinds of issues. But getting back to the volume import through Los Angeles increased February to February comparison over 50%. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the videos and photographs of dozens of ships just waiting to be unloaded in the Los Angeles port area. To give you a sense of how this impact, how the volume impact is hitting service, last year at this time, arrival timing was about 80% accurate. So ETAs were hit about 80% of the time. Now only 5% of ships are arriving on time. So it's sort of the entire supply chain has been completely sort of destroyed, and we're sort of just flying by the seat of our pants. Another big issue is domestic trucking capacity, and here not only we have outsized demand, but at the same time a major labor issue with driver shortages, and typically about 100,000 new drivers are started in the US each year. And this year, the schools for drivers and the availability were shut down. So we automatically lost that new influx of drivers, and we were already in a very tight driver shortage. So the trucking industry has been probably the single biggest negative impact on the day-to-day for Steer and our staff. Just no trucks available. The supply chains that have done generally okay through COVID are the ones that were that sort of had dedicated service providers inside the trade. So same truckers, same ports same carriers calling the same ports. Where those things were set up and in place for decades, they've done okay. For traders that were, dabbling in services when the timing was good, those folks have really suffered because there's just no availability for trucking. So we have, it's just a snowball effect of trucking issues. The long haul pricing has gone up about 30%. Domestic long haul rates up about 60%. So major economic impact on trucking. There have been other hidden costs throughout the supply chain related to trucking, delays, demurrage, traffic congestion. There's a lot of carrier confusion over termination locations at ports. So generally, pickup times have been increased by hours or days, which is very expensive economic impact for importers and exporters. And then there's just been a large kind of departure from the labor market for truckers, which is only exacerbated by the heavy incentive, unemployment benefits that the U.S. government has put in place to help with COVID. It's had a negative impact on trucking availability. Moving quickly to terminal capacity, we're basically just maxed out at most of our terminals throughout the US. And again, this just leads to delays, long wait times for drivers, and then throughout the year, different sort of COVID hotspots have sort of decimated the ranks of labor at various terminals. So that's had a big negative impact. In terms of practically booking new containers, this is normally a day-to-day issue. Just generally now we're looking at months out for booking. and this we expect to continue through the rest of the year. So normally you would book a container about 2 weeks in advance, and everything would go generally okay. Now you're looking probably 2 to 3 months, and at rates that are unprecedented in the shipping industry. So international, let's say Asia inbound to the US rates are probably 400% of traditional levels. Europe probably about double or a little worse than that. And even if you can get a booking, you're probably, in some cases there are, they call them premium surcharges, but I've heard of rates as high as $20,000 for an inbound Asia container from New York. And the traditional rate would have been in the $3,000 to $4,000 range. So all those impacts are just sort of devastating the supply chain and pressing labor on all fronts in supply chain services. Go to the next slide. Typically, we have 1 or 2 major impacts hitting the market that do affect everyone. We've had at least half a dozen, including COVID, major impacts. If we rewound the clock to just before COVID hit, the shipping market was focused mainly on the implementation of the International Maritime Organization's new rules related to reduction of SO2 and CO2 emissions, which went into effect on January 1st, 2020. And the goal here is to dramatically decrease emissions of those of CO2 and SO2 by about 80%. The shipping industry being among the worst polluters of any industry. Shipping generates about 13% of all SO2 and only about emissions, and only about 5% of world oil demand. And in terms of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, about 2.5% of global. So it was really an issue that needed to be addressed. Sorry. And so we thought that was going to be the major impact. Then COVID hit. You've all seen the news about the Suez Canal closure, which is unprecedented. There was in the Kaohsiung port, a major crane collapse. A second outbreak of COVID in Yantian, which will cause months of delays at exports from that port, which affect many trade carrier lanes because the volume is so strong out of Yantian, that part of China. And then there was an Oakland engine fire, which hit a ship, the NYK Delphinius in May. So, each one of these on its own could have had a major impact on the supply chain, but combined, really unprecedented negative impact on supply chain. We can go to the next slide. So I just want to give you a little bit of outlook for the near and far term. So near term, just looking through the end of this year, we have severe booking and space availability with ocean carriers. Again, almost non-existent through ability to obtain bookings, container bookings through September from China to the US or Europe. European bookings are likely to worsen through the middle of the summer as a result of the Yantian crisis. And in general, the carriers are having a hard time relocating equipment to service the trade. and that's all trades, but certainly the wood products trade in particular. We expect the rate problems to continue at near current levels, although we're starting to see some softening, maybe by the end of the summer. The premium surcharges, unfortunately, you don't get premium service for that. It's the same old service that you've had for forever. They will continue. We expect those to start to decline maybe in the fourth quarter and into next year. Generally, we're looking at EU rates, shipping rates, about double, not including equipment and other surcharges. So that's the unfortunate near-term outlook. If we look to the, we can go right to the long-term.
Thanks.
I think I hit, yep, that's great, Amy, thank you. I think I hit the trucking situation, really expected to continue as described through this year. I expect a very slow recovery in trucking in the US, probably over a 3 to 5 year period. But it's probably going to take some government intervention and private sector creativity to get through that. In the future, our clients are looking at expanded reliance on their projections and trying to look at sort of true demand planning to manage their cash flows and their product flows in a more strategic manner. Everything has sort of seemed reactionary in the last year. A lot of, and we're emphasizing with our clients to look at, solidifying your guaranteed container space with carriers in long-term contracts, looking ahead through 2022 and beyond. We expect, in general, carrier space to be very tight for the next 18 months or longer. And so the folks that are able to commit to some degree of volume and then to deliver that volume on a consistent basis with carriers will have the best results. Rates, we do not expect them to ever return to pre-COVID, quote unquote, traditional levels. Probably looking at about a 70 to 80% long-term increase in ocean rates. And those economic impacts impact the whole trade, just like supply chain disruptions. And so that's just a realistic long-term look. The carriers have been looking for and the ability to increase rates for 2 decades now, and it has hit the market with COVID. So in sum, I would just say that all of these impacts really are forcing importers and exporters and the trade in general to look at new strategies that are long-term, that include demand planning and constant communication and updates on supply chain issues. I'm available as a resource to anyone if you have any questions about those kinds of strategies. But typically, the best strategy is to stick with what you have and just try to improve it as best you can, because the services and the ability of supply chain vendors to make quick changes is relatively non-existent. So thank you for your attention.
Dan, thank you very much for this nice view and actually understanding this paradigm shift in timber trade in general. Also, I think for all the audience, this has been also a paradigm shift. We have been underestimating all the allocation and logistic power. You know, usually we understand value chains of timber products as a supply-demand issue, very much focused on productive aspects of it. And I think this is, understanding this now is very important to note what is the weight of the logistics and the allocation forces in the market. And this is a great view. Thank you very much, Dan, for your presentation. We now go to the next presentation, and last but not least, we will close the presentation with Rob Shaw. Rob is the technical manager with the soil certification, the Soil Association certification, and FSC and PEFC certification body. He is a forester with more than 30 years of experience conducting audits and training in many countries, including Japan, Portugal, Chile, China, South Africa, and European countries. Rob, thank you very much, and the mic is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and it's nice to be here today with so many people to talk about this important topic. As you say, I'm working for Soil Association certification body based in the UK. I'm a forester by training, and I've been involved in certification for more than 30 years, shall we say. So in terms of Soil Association, who are we? Well, for those of you who don't know, we are UK based in Bristol in England, and we have 50 staff based in the UK and now around the EU. We hold forest management and COC accreditations for FSC and PEFC schemes, and we have nearly 4,000 certificates around the world. We certify 27 million hectares of forest, and we're working in over 60 countries using a network of agents, and you can see the countries on screen there. So that gives us over 250 personnel worldwide and something like 150 or so fully trained auditors. We also are accredited to train auditors and staff in FSC and PEFC schemes. So in terms of, depending on which metric you choose, that puts us in the top sort of 3 to 5 certification bodies in the world in this area. And what's amazing is if we wind back to the start of the pandemic, there has actually for us been a growing demand. When we sat down at the beginning and everything stopped, we did some scenario planning, and we thought we would be losing staff, and we thought we would be losing certificates, but actually our business has grown 15% in the last 16 months, and we've taken on 6 new staff to try and cope with the workload. So just taking you on a little story through that journey. One very simple graph for you there, which shows that in the period April to April, almost 20% of our audits were delivered as remote or hybrid, and the hybrids came on stream nearer the end of that period as the COVID derogations and guidance were developed. But that's not the full story. There was a huge amount of work done because audits and inspections were delayed and postponed, and the picture emerged over the months between April and pretty much December of 2020. So both of our UK offices closed in April. We immediately had to go remote. We created a working group. We had to develop our QMS, and of course we were communicating and receiving communications from FSC and PEFC at the time. And FSC and PEFC themselves were impacted, and so they had reduced staff. And then they were also dealing with remote working. So the lessening of the requirements for on-site audits took a few months to develop. So we went through maybe 5 or 6 different iterations of guidance and derogations, which are available on FSC and PEFC websites. And so it's a credit to our staff that there was a massive amount of work going on in the background to reprogram our Salesforce database and to understand the rules. And then we were remotely training our auditors in the rules. And in the interim, our accreditation bodies, so ASI for FSC and UCAS for PEFC, were themselves switching to remote accreditation audits, and ASI increased the frequency and type of their audits to change strategy. Because behind all of this, we needed to make sure that our audits were delivering credible certification, which has been echoed in the previous speakers. So there was a huge effort by the staff day to day, week to week, to not lose clients or suspend clients if at all possible. And I think the whole certification world learned to collaborate and work together on that as far as we could. And we learned a lot about remote techniques as well. Just looking for a moment at the two scheme owners in the big schemes, FSC and PEFC, they had some hurdles to get over, and FSC have been working on a reduced staffing basis, which made some large decisions delayed, and big certification bodies like us were asking for clarification of the rules and pointing out where the log jams in the system were being created. PEFC obviously had some IAF and ISO rule constraints, which meant that they had to take time to develop and have their guidance approved. And although there was some convergence between FSC and PEFC, there was no real alignment as such on purpose, but it did in the end happen that for those dual certified clients, we were trying to find a way through the middle of this to keep people certified and to keep auditing credible. In terms of changes which were already underway, FSC have had their digital transformation up front and center as part of their big stakeholder engagement and data movement, and they've carried on pushing on with that. And so that's an issue, I think. And so throughout this whole period, the impact upon us as a certification body caught in the middle was stress, a concertina effect of audits all looking to be pushed to the end of the year and living in this kind of data soup with Excel spreadsheets flying backwards and forwards and extra reporting on different KPIs and things. So it was a very busy time. I make no apologies for sharing this quite old slide with you, but this comes from a paper from my MBA I did pre-pandemic, where I was focusing on digital change in the chain of custody sector. And I think we're somewhere in the bottom triangle of this graph here, where it's showing very simply that when digital transformation takes place, that it takes a while before that becomes mainstream and overtakes the more traditional methods. And I imagine that most of you have got an iPhone either in your left hand or on your desk. And if you think about the functionality in that amazing little machine and look at some of these initiatives down the right-hand side of my slide, I think what we need to do is we need to use the COVID pandemic experience to look at the ways that we can make data gathering, data validation, and data sharing much more customer-centric. And we really have got to look at our environmental footprint as an auditing organization and auditing in general. Whilst there isn't a total replacement of boots on the ground, I do agree there's huge value in being there and talking to people face to face and walking around forests and factories. I must say that having been involved in some hybrid audits myself, including our first PEFC FM audit in South Africa, which was done as a hybrid, the technology does now exist to use live video streaming and recorded videos and other techniques to gather information efficiently, and then hopefully share that information with all the different customers and stakeholders in this value chain. And in the UK, I mean, the price of timber has trebled. So some of that value chain has got to find its way down into these technologies, I think. Just to finish and give you some key takeaways on my thoughts on this. Remote and hybrid auditing does offer a low impact option, but it must be credible. And FSC and PEFC, I know, are already thinking about this. I'm a member of the PEFC Chain of Custody Working Group, and whilst we haven't turned our full attention to it, that's very much top of the menu for the future. And accreditation and certification must adapt. the big thing about digital transformation is that one organization's transformation is another's disruption. And I do think that everyone in the room needs to collaborate. We need international data standards, and we need sufficient investment to make the data meaningful and easily shared and analyzed. We've never seen the demand for sustainability and supply chain auditing so high. I think certification and good forest governance and good forest stewardship has come of age. And because large corporates are looking to de-risk their supply chains, I'll just leave you with the thought that the agile, digitally savvy certification bodies will prosper. But we do need costs to reduce because the normative standard demand is forever increasing. And that's a hard circle to square. I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much, everybody. And I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Very interesting presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the questions that I had prepared. And it looks like I'm a very bad moderator because I could not stop the presenters in any way. It was very interesting. So I'm gonna move forward and just share with you some of the takeaways of these presentations. And please, to all the speakers, forgive me that we don't have the time for questions. I have a lot of interesting questions and we don't have time. So I would like just to remark from Rupert Oliver that the main three messages from Rupert has been the FLEGT, TILAS, and the trade due diligence measures have significantly and raising global coverage, and they should continue to be built on. And of course, regarding the EU and the UK, they need to continue to focus on delivering genuine market advantage to FLEGT licensed product and consistent to keep being consistent with the UTR and the UK TR implementation and enforcement. And of course, there is the need for recognition of FLEGT licensed timber in procurement policy and green building as an incentive. As Rob said, we need to improve regulation and the clean supply chain of forest products. Therefore, we need to create positive incentives associated to legal compliance, such as improved market access for FLEGT licensed timber and other responsibly sourced products, which are low forest risk commodities that, of course, make us to be clear that they conserve the forest and they can store carbon, not only in the forest, but also in forest products. Regarding Joe, he stressed three main ideas: that the US market of imported wood product has been strengthening since the initial COVID shock in early 2020, especially due to strong home building and remodeling, as we have said. And for many manufactured goods, sourcing is moving away from China to several countries, including Vietnam. And this was one of my questions. What would be the near future role of China when start implementing the 2018 regulations and the due diligence? That is a big question, and the role of China and how the trade war is going to end up changing this paradigm shift. And of course, the remote due diligence and the care is possible, but importers might implement strategies to overcome the challenge for not having boots on the ground. And this is very important because we have had in the last decade very important advances in governance and legal compliance, and we cannot go back. So it's very important that we try to protect these important governance advances in the trade of forest products. Regarding Dan, his excellent presentation, he told us that all global supply chains have been dramatically impacted by COVID. Of course, impacting timing, cost, availability of inputs, labor, services, equipment, and the booking and the logistics have become very challenging. Many of these changes have represent paradigm shifts, and many of them are going to be remain with us. We have to adapt to them, and we have to keep an eye on these changes and how this is going to change the way we do business in the forest sector. And of course, the global supply chains are all interconnected, are interdependent. So one major shift or even impacts of all elements of the supply chain will be affected between supply chains. Rob gave us an excellent idea about the remote and hybrid auditing, which offers a low impact option, but he stressed that these have to remain credible. You know, accreditation and certification must adapt. With COVID, it has continued growing. Of course, there is an element of digital transformation that requires a lot of collaboration, international data standards, investments, and has to move to be customer-centric and also business-centric. You know, we cannot forget that this is part of the business, and this has to adapt and help to accelerate the business. The sustainability and supply chain audit demand has never been higher, especially associated with carbon and ecosystem services. And the value in the timber value chain is rising, but we need to define some allocation aspects. Who is benefiting, who is losing? So all these questions remain to be discussed. Maybe in next sessions, we will have the time to discuss those. Also, large corporates are looking to de-risk the supply chain. So the agile, digitally savvy certificate bodies will prosper. And of course, transaction cost, the cost of certification need to be reduced. But on the other hand, the complexity of certification and due diligence has to increase. So with that, I will close. I will beg your pardon for not allowing more questions from the audience, but you can blame all on me. I hope you had you will have a very nice next sessions. We will follow them. And Amy, the mic is back to you with you.
Thank you so much, Guillermo, and thanks to all the presenters who started off this week for us. We're going to take a quick moment before we end this session just to get your feedback and see what you thought. So in the chat, Catherine just placed a link that will bring you right to this quick survey to get your feedback. So if you click on that link, it will take you directly there to get your opinions. And otherwise, you can also access it as indicated above by going to this website, menti.com, and putting in the code 60700672. Give you a couple of seconds, and while we're waiting, I just want to let you know that what we are going to do in a moment is we are going to close this session out, and we're going to ask you to take a break, go get some water, get some coffee, run to the bathroom, and we will be coming back in about 25 minutes to be 26 minutes to be very precise. And we will use the same link. So you'll just come in using the same calendar link that you received or the link you received in your emails. And we will be back for the Pandemic and Timber Trade Views from SMEs session. So we look forward to having you join us again in a few minutes. And you should be able to continue putting your opinions in with regards to this session. So we thank you for your feedback, and we will look forward to seeing you very soon.